wonder who's where Israel's going to find its allies in the region. It's going to be difficult for them to have the kind of strategic allies that they had with Egypt, and if that weakens, then their strategic alliance with Jordan is also likely to weaken, and Turkey has already frayed terribly. So all this, and Saudi Arabia can't afford to stand alone in that. So I'm beginning, I do understand the anxiety that the Israelis feel about the way things have are shaping up in the Middle East, but to stand for the status quo is no longer a possibility.
I think that last point is extremely important, that the status quo has ended. And some players are going to respond effectively and creatively, and they're going to adapt to it, and others are going to try and recreate what was, and I think they're going to fail. And I don't know which way the United States will go. I'm hoping that they prove adaptive. I don't know if they will.
We have values and we have interests. And for the most part, I think our values are with, these, let's hope, young Democrats. And yet our interests, in terms of economic interests, are essentially to keep the world economy from capsizing if the revolution carries forward on into Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries. In that case, the weight of the interests versus the values is going to come under a lot of stress.
Saudi Arabia is vulnerable. I mean, you've spent time in Saudi Arabia, and they have all the ingredients. They have a very dissatisfied youth population. They have high unemployment rates and underemployment rates. They have a divided and out-of-touch autocratic elite. They've got these attempts to censor the media, combined with a completely media-saturated society, which can see everything happening from outside the borders. And the Saudis are watching al-Jazeera too. And I think that the alliance with Saudi Arabia has been the absolute linchpin of the American role in the region. And I think that people don't want to envision change in Saudi Arabia, but I think that...
Well, change is coming soon in Saudi Arabia. The king is old and ill, and so is his number two. And his number three, Naif, is a kind of formidable character. The interior minister, but he's also elderly. So we'll be seeing, some big changes in Saudi Arabia soon, and whether those kinds of transitions in the context of all this regional turmoil can be managed by the royal family is going to be a real test.
I think that, as a social scientist, this is fascinating to see, because many of us have been talking and writing for years about the unsustainability of the status quo and pointing to all the factors that were going to make change happen. But then year after year, nothing changed. And it grew lonely and frustrating. And now all of a sudden, as things begin to move, there's a very real sense that everything is moving. It's like playing that game Jenga. You can't just pull out one piece, because then everything collapses. And that there's a real feeling that that's where we are right now. And where everything goes is very difficult to see. You can take the question of reform. You say, well, if the Saudis can reform, maybe they can avoid this fate. And is it true? Are there reforms that these leaders in the Arab countries can take which could prevent uprisings? And that is not at all obvious.